The Civil War was the bloodiest conflict in American history, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers falling on the battlefield and countless more losing their lives in makeshift hospitals due to inadequate medical conditions. The hospital in this story is one such historical relic, a former field hospital that has now become the subject of ghostly legends. During the war, doctors performed numerous brutal surgeries here, often without anesthesia, leaving soldiers to endure immense pain. Many succumbed to infections, and their spirits, heavy with lingering resentment, are said to still haunt this place. Some claim that the souls of the fallen wander the halls, reliving their moments of death, but their presence has never been confirmed or disproved. Tonight, Dr. Lee and his team have decided to enter the hospital to face these rumored spirits and attempt to uncover the secrets hidden within this abandoned building. Under the moonlight, the old Civil War-era hospital appeared particularly eerie, like a relic forgotten by time, standing silently in the night with an inescapable heavy presence. Dr. Lee, a renowned paranormal investigator, felt the familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with unease. This hospital was infamous for its bloody history, a place where, in the throes of war, doctors had performed gruesome, desperate surgeries. Many soldiers succumbed not to their wounds but to infections, neglect, and the chaotic environment of wartime medical practices. It was said that their restless spirits still roamed these decaying halls, trapped in a cycle of pain and suffering. Tonight, Dr. Lee and his team would find out if those whispers were true. The team consisted of a mix of seasoned investigators and newcomers. John, Dr. Lee's right-hand man, was a tech expert with a stoic demeanor, someone who had faced the paranormal before without flinching. Then there was Sarah, a psychology student who had joined the team recently, her wide eyes betraying both excitement and nerves. Dr. Lee gave her a reassuring smile as they approached the entrance. "Just stick with me, okay? We'll be fine," he said, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, the sound echoing eerily through the vast, empty hall. The wooden floor groaned under their weight, and with each step it seemed to amplify the silence, almost as if the hospital itself was aware of their presence. The air was thick and carried an indescribable heaviness, a feeling that Sarah couldn't shake. She shivered slightly, glancing at Dr. Lee. "You feel that?" she whispered. Dr. Lee nodded, his gaze sweeping the darkened corridor ahead of them. "Residual energy," he said softly. "Impressions left on the environment from the past. Sometimes the emotions of those who suffered here can cling to a place like this." Sarah swallowed hard, her unease deepening. They began setting up their equipment in the hospital's main hall, where once rows of beds had been filled with the wounded and dying. John silently worked on calibrating the EMF meters and positioning the cameras. Meanwhile, Sarah helped unpack a spirit box, her hands trembling slightly. The flickering light of their lanterns cast long shadows across the walls, bringing the peeling paint and old bloodstains into sharp relief. Dr. Lee already felt it, a presence, watching them from just beyond the shadows. The feeling settled in his bones like a creeping chill. "Guys, I think we're not alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words had barely left his mouth when a loud bang echoed through the empty hallway, the sudden noise slicing through the silence like a knife. Sarah jumped, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. John looked up from his equipment, his expression tense but composed. "Footsteps?" Dr. Lee muttered. They all heard it now, the distinct sound of heavy boots marching across the floor above them, the cadence almost militaristic. "Let's move," Dr. Lee ordered, trying to keep his voice calm. He gestured for John and Sarah to follow as they made their way toward the stairs, the wooden steps creaking ominously beneath their feet. Upstairs, they found a room in complete disarray. Medical tools lay scattered everywhere, as if someone had angrily swept them off the shelves. An old hospital bed stood in the center, its white sheets stained with dark, dried blood, and twisted as if someone had struggled violently against them. The metallic scent of rusted iron hung thick in the air. Dr. Lee frowned. This wasn't in our research," he murmured, his eyes scanning the room, unease tightening his chest. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, echoing through the halls with such intensity that it seemed to vibrate within their bones. "What the hell was that?" John stammered, his calm facade cracking. Dr. Lee motioned toward the bed, his eyes narrowing. "I think it came from there," he said, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heartbeat. He took a cautious step forward, feeling the chill in the room deepen. As he approached the bed, a ghostly figure began to take shape at its foot. A young soldier, his uniform tattered and soaked with blood, his face twisted in a mask of agony. The team froze, the temperature in the room dropping drastically. The soldier's form flickered like a broken hologram, his moans growing louder as he clutched at his stomach, his ghostly fingers digging into an unseen wound. Dr. Lee's heart sank. "He's reliving his death," he whispered, understanding dawning on him. The pain, the suffering, it was all still here, playing out like a terrible echo from the past. Sarah's breath was coming in short gasps now, her eyes locked on the soldier. "Doctor?" she stammered, her voice trembling. The apparition's moans grew louder, filling the room, the sheer agony in his voice almost unbearable to hear. His body began to contort, his back arching unnaturally as if gripped by an unseen force. Suddenly, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into darkness. The team huddled together, their breathing ragged, illuminated only by the faint glow of their equipment. The ghost's moans had grown deafening, reverberating through the walls, a chorus of pain that seemed to echo from every direction. Dr. Lee took a shaky breath, trying to maintain his composure. "Everyone, stay calm," he managed, his voice tight with fear. "We need to try and communicate. If we can help him, maybe we can—" But before he could finish, the soldier's moans turned into a blood-curdling scream. A scream filled with rage and despair, a sound that seemed to pierce through their very souls. Panic surged through the group. "Run!" John shouted, his voice cracking. They turned, scrambling for the door, but it slammed shut before they could reach it, the heavy wood vibrating with a force that shook the walls. Sarah screamed, her eyes wide with terror as she pounded on the door, her fists making dull thuds against the unyielding wood. "It won't budge!" she cried, her voice rising in pitch as the ghostly figure began to drift toward them, its form becoming less defined, its features blurring until it was nothing more than a dark, shifting mass. The air grew colder still, each breath they took clouding before them, their bodies trembling from more than just fear. Dr. Lee stepped forward, his hands trembling as he tried to reason with the spirit. "Please," he called out, his voice cracking. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to understand, to help." But the spirit's scream only grew louder, more enraged, the walls seeming to pulse with the force of it. The unseen energy in the room pressed against them, a suffocating, icy grip tightening around their chests. Sarah was sobbing now, her back against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. John was desperately fiddling with his equipment, trying to get a light, a spark, anything. The ghost loomed closer, its form shifting and growing until it seemed to fill the entire room, its presence an oppressive weight on their minds. Dr. Lee's heart pounded as he heard a whisper, soft but clear, echoing in his ear. You did this!" His blood ran cold. He turned, his eyes wide, and saw the face of the soldier, now inches from his own, the ghost's hollow eyes staring through him. "Oh God," Dr. Lee whispered, realization dawning, his voice barely audible over the din. "I think I know you." The spirit lunged, and suddenly the world around them erupted into chaos. The lights exploded in a shower of sparks. The cameras toppled to the ground, their lenses shattering. An invisible force swept through the room, knocking the team off their feet. Dr. Lee hit the ground hard, his vision blurring as he heard his team's terrified screams. He tried to reach out, his fingers brushing against the cold floor, but his body felt heavy, unresponsive. The last thing he saw was Sarah being dragged across the floor by an unseen force, her screams fading into the distance. The darkness closed in, and then there was nothing but silence. The next morning, when the police arrived, they found the team's equipment scattered across the floor, the hospital eerily silent once more. On one of the recorders, they heard Dr. Lee's last desperate words, "Oh God, I think I know you," followed by the sound of running footsteps, a deafening scream, and then silence. The hospital still stands, its windows dark, its doors locked. The locals say that if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can still hear the screams of Dr. Lee and his team echoing through the halls, forever trapped in the hospital's tragic past.